New atheist arguments against religion. Perhaps distinctions should be drawn between two kinds of arguments presented by new atheists. We have discussed the new atheist treatment of the God hypothesis as disproved and untenable in the face of new Darwinian explanations. Contrastingly, we have also witnessed philosophical rejection of this postulation by those who rightly differentiate between the evolution mechanism and the supposed agency of a deity who is guiding it. Moreover, we also noted the subtle but important difference between methodological and metaphysical naturalism. Overall, this begs the question, can these findings be generalized to religion in general, or has religion itself been disproven in light of this new scientific evidence? Christopher Hitchens writes, religion has run out of justifications thanks to the telescope and the microscope. It no longer offers an explanation of anything important, where once it used to be able, by its total command of a worldview, to prevent the emergence of rivals. It can now only impede and retard or try to turn back the measurable advances that we have made. On this point, Dawkins claims, as a scientist, I am hostile to fundamentalist religion because it actively debauches the scientific enterprise. Grayling furthers this from fundamentalist religion to all religion by suggesting Darwinism is not compatible with religion. The evidences of biological science are evidences against the presence of supernatural agency in the universe. Grayling also states that intelligent design is creationism in disguise. Clearly, two separate arguments are defined here. Firstly, an argument against the God hypothesis, as previously discussed. The second argument concerns religion. To what extent, though has religious and scientific discourse been entangled according to individuals who take such discourses seriously? This, of course, is a big question to which there is no simple answer in what follows. I will outline the main approaches that both Muslim and Christian scholars have taken when answering these questions. In both Christian and Muslim traditions, religious scriptures have been interpreted in a variety of ways. While discussing ancient Jewish philosophy, David Statz differentiates between modest and bold concordism. The former allows scriptural reconciliation with science, whereas the latter assumes positive teaching of science in a scripture, though one cannot generalize approaches to biblical exegesis. Three approaches to the Bible stand out. The first is a modest concordist in allegorizing approach, which emphasizes the allegorical nature of the Genesis account. Since the verses are allegorical, it may be argued theology cannot expand on evolution or Big Bang cosmology. This approach has exegetical precedent from the patristic period, most notably from the Alexandrian school. It is often met with such challenges which are beyond the scope of this paper, relate to deciding which verses may or may not be allegorized. The second approach is the literalist non-concordist approach, which, when applied to the Bible, does not need to produce a young age creationist conception, as even some patristic church fathers like Augustine, who is infrequent in his allegorization, may not have considered the days in the Genesis account to be literal. Nevertheless, a literal approach to Genesis has its own set of scientific and historical challenges, including interpretations which have patristic and medieval precedent, and which indicate the universe's age as 6,000 years old. The approach is not non-concordist from its own perspective, as it defines science and its processes in ways that differ from classical approaches of philosophy of science. Ken Ham, a young age creationist, divides science into observational and historical types, the latter of which is highly subject to human interpretation, and where conflict exists, and the plain reading of the text must take precedence. Proponents of this view refer to a genealogical approach of Genesis 5, which adds up the years from one generation to another, thereby concluding the universe is approximately 6,000 years old. See Floyd Nolan Jones, The Chronology of the Old Testament. One can categorize this perspective as rejectionist on account of its rejecting popularly accepted science. A third approach, popularized recently by the likes of Dr. Hugh Ross, is a bold concordist, literalist approach which aims to establish how scientific phenomenon like the Big Bang is taught in Scripture. Accordingly, such an approach is essentially a literalist old age creationist approach, but one which crucially stops at the point of human evolution. Much like scholars in the patristic period like Origen and Augustine mentioned above, early Islamic scholars were also occasionally noticeably concordist, both modestly and boldly. Nevertheless, representatives of major creedal schools of thought like Ibn Taymiyyah for the Hanbalis and Al-Ghazali for the Ash'aris, which interpret verses which reference the physical world in a literal manner. The philosopher or the philosophers most prominently represented by Ibn Sina, like Origen of Alexandria, though perhaps less flagrantly, would prefer allegorizing verses, which appeared to not correspond with the cosmologies of the day, as he did with the theory of 10 celestial spheres. Though Ibn Sina and the philosophers' work has survived to the modern day, their practical preferences have become practically disregarded, particularly after the scathing attacks of both al-Ghazali. In his famous work, The Incoherence of the Philosophers of and Ibn Taymiyyah, following a response to the Greek logicians. In such works, Ibn Sina was excommunicated from Islam, and though Ibn Rushd others refuted aspects of this, in his The Incoherence of the Incoherence, the Sunni Muslim world appeared to have already decided on the matter. The net result of this historical development was the allegorizing historical narratives or verses of naturalistic significance were limited to creedal aspects of referencing Allah's throne, Arsh, and his names and attributes, which is notably controversial among Ash'aris, Hanbalis, Shia, and other less well-known schools. Quranic escapes from virtually all of these creedal schools, except the literal correspondence of naturalistic verses with the real world, perhaps most notably including escapes of schools such as Fakir, and though such escapes discuss the verse's symbolic value, virtually none of them achieved what Ibn Sina origin were willing to do, namely reduce the verses to a form of archaeology, stripping it of its literal value. With the creedal exclusion of the philosophers, allegorical escases, popular Islamic exegetical approaches to naturalistic verses can be easily divided into three types: bold concordism, modest concordism, and modern science rejection. As with Christian scholarship and apologetics, these categories are not fixed, as a scholar or apologist may be rejectionist in one context and not in another. Zakir Naik is the most popular representative of the bold concordist literalist approach in the English-speaking world. In a 2017 study, online videos were identified with the terms Islam and science together on YouTube, and the speaker with the highest output was Zakir Naik. Like Dr. Hughes, Naik indicates that the Quran teaches that the Big Bang occurred, and also, like Ross, Naik doesn't accept human evolution because of its contradiction with the plain reading of the text Guardian. Naik's scientific arguments are almost identical to those of Dr. Maurice Bucaille, who wrote a polemic book titled The Bible, Quran and Science, effectively arguing that the Bible is incongruent to science on matters related to cosmology, geology and Noah's flood, whereas the Quran is in line with such matters. This novel evangelizing apologetic Islamic approach, termed the Ijaz approach in Arabic, even prompted Salafist clergy members in Saudi Arabia to start a committee on the scientific miracles of the Quran and Sunnah. However, this approach was criticized for employing what is the exegesis, and especially regarding issues relating to Darwinism and evolution. Criticizing this approach, Ahmad Dalal states, when Muslims were the main producers of science in the world, they did not advocate wedding science and religion now. Now, ironically, when Muslim participation in the production of the universal culture of science is dwindling, they call for bringing the two together. The second rejectionist approach does not oppose all scientific phenomena, only those deemed contrary to exegetical precedent or clear text. This is best exemplified by the theory of human evolution, which is considered incompatible with literal Quranic meanings. Unfortunately, much of what has been missing from the discourse from new atheists and theologians who attempt to counter them is a meaningful engagement with scientific philosophy, for example, theoretically, and when differentiating between methodological and metaphysical naturalism, it may be suggested that Muslims and Christians who adopt views which may contradict human evolution or the entire Darwinian enterprise adopt an instrumental view rather than a realist view, since instrumentalism does not necessitate believing the literal truth of scientific theory. Muslim and Christians can accept the validity of the Darwinian model, even allowing advances in it within their spaces, without needing to believe in the evolution of Homo sapiens, for example, from another hominids. Accordingly, Darwinian evolution can act as a useful heuristic, like a London Underground map, though highly useful, is not properly to scale. Consequently, inhibitions to the scientific progress can be mitigated. Two caveats must be made here. Firstly, if this approach is adopted, claims made by Ross and Knight, for example, that the Big Bang Theory is explicitly taught by the Quran or Bible, must be softened at least to a modest concordist position. Secondly, it may be difficult to argue on instrumental grounds that the age of the universe, being 14 billion years, is a model, as it is a historical claim rather than a model.